Chapter 5. The wedding of Solomon and Naamah was inevitable, but the ceremony subdued. To take a foreign wife was politically dangerous for any Israelite king, and even more so for a young king early in his reign. Solomon tried to keep the matter quiet, but it could not be hidden completely, and uncomfortable whispers followed in the streets of Jerusalem, whispers which did not escape the notice of the king himself. But, having saved her life, and taken a wife he truly did esteem as worthy, Solomon returned to his duties, while Naamah was given a home outside the city. Exactly 1 year following their wedding, Naamah entered the palace for only the second time since she had become Solomon's wife. Though she was grateful to him for saving her life, she was saddened by the politics that banished her to reside outside the city. She had learned a fair amount about the God of Israel in her first year, her quick mind absorbing the politics of the situation, even if the God of the land remained somewhat mysterious to her. She actually saw Solomon only once or twice a week, as often as he could make it out to her home, for he had instructed her that it was better for all if he went to her than for her to come into the holy city. The short visits that he could grant to her and their baby son were warm and happy. The connection they had made in Egypt turned out to be more than just youthful infatuation. Their minds did indeed work similarly. He would often compliment her by asking her opinion on various matters related to his office. She believed that he truly valued her thoughts, and she was correct. Of all of Solomon's advisors, Naamah was in a unique position. There was nothing for her to gain or lose by virtue of her counsel, her place being fixed. Considering what her fate would have been if she had remained in Ammon, she determined to be grateful, even if her marriage was less than a woman might desire. Today, Naamah was about to test the strength of that marriage with the revelation of a secret she had deliberately withheld from Solomon, gambling that, at a later date, she would know better how to reveal it to him. Today, she had brought a guest with her, a guest that Solomon was not expecting. Solomon spent the morning looking eagerly forward to the arrival of Naamah. His schedule was busy, and he could foresee by the current state of his affairs that he might not have time to visit her for several days. The chance to meet with her in the palace was a rare treat. He had arranged for a noon meal that they could share together in his private chamber. He dismissed himself from a morning meeting early, after giving those who remained instructions on how to conclude its business, and went to prepare for Naamah's arrival. Solomon was an accomplished chef and enjoyed cooking when he had the time for it. He decided to prepare their meal himself and share it with her in his private quarters. Presently, there was a knock on the door, and a guard announced her presence. "Come," Solomon said, simply inserting a gruff unfamiliarity into his voice for the benefit of the guard. He heard the door open and close and stood to meet Naamah, who would soon round the corner where a large indoor palm marked the transition between the entryway and the dwelling area proper. When she appeared, Solomon broke into a pleased smile and held out his hands toward her. "Welcome, Naamah." She glanced at him and took a step forward, then stopped, looking back toward the door. Solomon frowned, following her gaze. A moment later, another person stepped timidly into the room. Solomon saw it was a young woman, one he did not recognize. Naamah reached out and took the young woman's hand, pulling her fully into the room. Solomon looked from Naamah to the unexpected visitor with surprise. The girl looked back at him shyly, then cast her eyes to the floor. She was dressed in very fine but unusual apparel, a sleeveless white silk garment of unknown origin, with gold embroidery throughout and a golden waist sash. She had been carefully decorated with jewelry, fine earrings, and many bracelets scattered up to her petite biceps. A modest but finely crafted tiara was upon her head. The brightness of her silk contrasted sharply with her dark Arab arms. She was thin and well proportioned. Her hair was black and braided with many fine braids, and her face had been carefully painted to highlight her eyes and lips. Her skin and appearance, expression, everything about her revealed tender youth. "My lord the king," Naamah said, "may I present to you Adma, Queen Virgin of Milcom." The girl dropped to her knees and bowed low with her face to the floor before Solomon. Solomon peered curiously at the pretty little visitor, then turned his eyes back to meet Naamah's, who treated him to one of her trademark deep, silent gazes. A few moments of silence followed Naamah's introduction, and Solomon observed that the young girl was actually trembling on the cold marble floor. She was obviously terrified. Naamah motioned with her eyes toward the girl, as if to say Solomon should say something to her. It is my pleasure to meet you," Solomon said, giving Naamah a curious look. Then he stepped forward, and taking the girl's hand, lifted her to her feet. "Please, come sit with us." The girl stood, but still kept her eyes fixed on the floor. The three walked over to the couches where Solomon had arranged the food on a low table. Solomon reclined at his usual couch, and Naamah found a place across from him, the young girl clinging to her side. "Naamah, this is an acquaintance of yours from the land of Ammon, no doubt. And to what do we owe the pleasure of her visit?" he asked. Naamah took a deep breath. "We owe her visit to the fact that it has now been a full year since the high priest of Milcom last took a bride. He takes one every year, either he or Milcom himself." "High priest of Milcom?" Solomon asked. "What does he have to do with—" Then the meaning hit him. "Naamah!" he exclaimed, his eyes growing wide. "To my father and all those in Ammon, even those who sent this girl here today, you are the high priest of Milcom, a fact to which I owe my life, and now also this girl Adma." At the mention of her name, the girl once again timidly raised her eyes to look at Solomon, this time holding her gaze a moment longer with desperate, childlike uncertainty. Solomon looked back and forth in shock between Naamah and the young girl. "I know what you are thinking, my lord," Naamah explained. "Believe me, I do, for I have not dwelt in Israel for a year and learned nothing. But I tell you this, Queen Adma's presence here as your wife need be known by no one. She can live with me outside the city, ostensibly as my nurse, but for her life to be spared, you must send word to those who sent her here that the priest has accepted and is pleased with his new bride." Solomon groaned, dropped his head, and began to rub his eyes, grimacing in internal conflict. The presence of Naamah in Jerusalem had been difficult enough to explain, and now this, and it had not escaped his notice that Naamah had said that the priest of Milcom takes a bride every year. A strange new voice punctuated the silence for the first time. "I have been well trained how I might be pleasing to you," the girl said, trembling, then added, "My lord," imitating Naamah's form of address. He looked up at the girl, who tried to smile and then, blushing, looked back down at the floor, still trembling slightly. Solomon sighed. "Naamah, you should have told me. You've been aware of this for some time, even from the beginning. You are a most devious and crafty woman. Have you not often remarked that for this cause you love me? And so you wait until this poor creature is here in my presence to bring me such terrible news?" At those words, the girl let out a horrified, choking gasp and began to sniff. No, not you, child," he quickly added. "You are fine. You are perfect. You are exactly what the high priest of Milcom would want." He flashed an irritated glance at Naamah. "But I am not the high priest of Milcom. I am the king of Israel and the servant of Jehovah. How can I possibly take you and her and another every year from this time hence? Is that what this is to become?" The girl frowned, genuinely confused now. "It may not seem possible now," Naamah admitted, "but time can ease the situation in gradually. 10 years could easily pass before anyone knows there is a wife other than me. I could simply need handmaids. They can be kept outside the city, just as I am. But if this child takes back to Ammon the testimony that she just heard, that you are not the high priest of Milcom, she goes back to her death, and another innocent one like her will perish each year at this time until there is a high priest again. Does your own convenience justify the spilling of so much innocent blood?" Solomon sighed, shook his head, and got up to wander over to the window, looking out through the lattice. The young girl was about to speak again, but Naamah quickly hushed her, taking her by the hand. For a few minutes Solomon continued to brood by the window, while Naamah and Admah waited in silence. Finally, he spoke. "Certainly we cannot send this poor creature back to her death." Naamah and Admah exchanged excited glances. "But we must find another way in the future," he added, still gazing outside. "I will help you explore other ways," Naamah assured him. "My only request is that you bestow some relief to this woman now. Assure her that her place here is secure, and we will leave that problem for another day. She has traveled far, and until now has lived a life of desperation. Believe me, I know." Solomon turned and looked back at the couch where the women were seated. Naamah, with her deep, quiet gaze, the picture of poised maturity, making the girl who sat next to her appear more like a daughter, though they were actually no more than a year apart. Naamah had been gracious in referring to her as a woman. Nonetheless, Solomon observed that the girl was attractive, and more so now that she had calmed down a bit. "Very well," he said with resignation. "Admah, I welcome you to the land of Israel. You are accepted as my queen." The words sounded strange to his own ears, spoken to someone he had only met a few minutes prior. He lifted an instructive finger. "Naamah will teach you what you must know to survive here. I encourage you to pay attention to her, for the situation is not as simple as you may have been expecting." Admah looked up at him while Solomon nervously shifted his feet, not knowing quite what else to say. Naamah caught his eye and sent him a silent message. Solomon stepped forward and took the young girl by the hand, raising her to her feet before him. "You are a most welcome and pleasing addition to my family," he said kindly, bending down to kiss her on the cheek as he cast a glance at Naamah. Naamah nodded with approval. The girl blushed and flashed a full smile back up at him, revealing even more natural beauty than he had yet noticed. "Thank you, my lord," she said more confidently. "I will not disappoint you." "I'm certain you won't," Solomon replied, adding under his breath, "For that you would have to see me." Solomon was not optimistic about Naamah's ability to find an acceptable alternative in the future. For all of her intelligence, she had difficulty understanding the demands of the Israelite religion. He wondered if she would ever fully absorb it. Naamah was an agreeable companion, a good and interesting conversationalist, a wise counselor, in many ways a good fit for him. But there was a part of him, the most important part, where he and she had no commerce at all. The core of Solomon's being revolved around his God, a God who was a mystery to Naamah, all of her intelligence notwithstanding. Solomon felt acutely in his own heart the vacuum left by the absence of spiritual fellowship with his Ammonite wife. The vision ended abruptly, replaced by the blur of landscape, as Solomon found himself back in the present, falling, rushing toward impact. Suddenly he glimpsed the form of a large boulder, its rugged topside hurtling toward him. He twisted his body to avoid it, and branches of plants grasped at him from several directions, throwing him into rotation. 1,000 snapping twigs later, he crunched to a sudden halt at the bottom, the impact releasing all the air from his lungs, the rush of wind in his ears replaced by sudden silence. He found himself looking up through twisted vines at a starlit sky as several leaves floated down toward him. I am alive. The brush had broken his fall enough to render it unfatal. His surroundings came into focus. In his peripheral vision, he perceived the ridge from which he had fallen, and his mind whirled in instinctive calculation. I cannot have fallen more than 4 seconds. I cannot be badly hurt. 1,000 thoughts followed on its heels. What tripped me? Where are my guards? Can I walk? What an unlikely place to find myself, a king, at the bottom of a ravine, alone in the wilderness, in near darkness. The powerful visions he had just experienced lingered, like strong dreams after a quick awakening. Gradually, reality pushed the visions aside, and the series of events that had resulted in his tangled recline in the hyssop bush came to remembrance. He had been traveling. He was on a journey to Tyre, a city to the north of Israel, accompanied by just 2 guards. For the safety of the secretly traveling king, the wilderness trail, rather than the valley road, had been chosen to avoid encounters on the main thoroughfare. The party had pushed ahead unrelenting that day until the light began to fade, and then had chosen a place on the mountain called Little Hermon to set up camp for the night. After all was arranged, Solomon had left his tent, prodded into needless movement by the restless demands of depression. It was this walk that had ended in his present predicament. After hiking a distance of several bow shots from camp, he had found himself at the rounded crown of the hill of Morah, staring blankly over the Jezreel Valley as evening chased the sun over the horizon. His 2 guards, Jachin and Boaz, were not far away. They had left camp temporarily to scout out the best watch points for the night, and Solomon had wandered. From his vantage point on the hill, he could see the fertile valley spreading before him. Far out in its haze, he saw a glow that he took to be the city of Jezreel, and just below him, the torchlights of the little backwater town of Shunem twinkled in an irregular circle. To his right, the sun was sinking slowly, blurring into the haze like a melting orange. A cool wind rushed up from the valley, drenched with the sweet smells of harvest crops. The scene, though ruggedly beautiful, had provided no balm for his troubled soul as he gazed, his mind elsewhere. While he was so engaged, he suddenly noticed something odd. A thin, whitish line, visible on the hills and draws to his right, as though painted across them. What was it? His first thought was that it was a road or trail cut into the hillsides, but there was something different about it. Puzzled, he squinted out, trying to identify the strange object in the fading light. He soon noticed that it, whatever it was visible on both sides of him, showing up as a horizontal line on the hills to his left as well as to his right. A prick of curiosity overrode his inner torment. After musing upon the unknown phenomenon for several moments, he perceived that if he were to hike a short distance down the slope from where he was standing, he would likely intersect it. Drawn by intrigue, he worked his way downward. A short time later, he found himself standing before a strange structure, a low rock wall composed of roughly cut stones, no more than a cubit in height, but many bow shots in length. He traced it with his eyes, left and right, seeing it descend into draws and reappear beyond, its white outline visible even in the quickly fading light. It disappeared from view in both directions beyond the farthest visible hillsides, without termination. This puzzling structure was certainly man-made, too short for a fence, much too short for a wall. It appeared absolutely purposeless. He was just about to step over it to examine it from the other side, when suddenly he was startled by the near cry of an eagle overhead. Looking quickly up, he stepped into a hole, twisting his ankle. Yelping in pain and hopping onto one foot, he had tripped over the low stone structure, and thus he began his fall down the rocky slope. It was while in this fall that the visions had come, 3 powerful visions passing before his eyes in a few brief seconds of freefall. Now, lying on his back, staring upward, Solomon groaned in as much annoyance as pain, though his ankle was fairly throbbing. The scaly branches of hyssop brush cut his view of the sky into a jigsaw puzzle through which the 3 bright stars of the Orion belt twinkled. I must be facing north. A sharp stick was poking him in the back. He twisted away from it. His water flask broke, and he felt the sharp cut of cold liquid on his skin. He groaned again. It would take considerable effort to rise, untangle himself from his position in the bush, and get out to where he could walk. He suddenly felt tired. He did not think he was badly hurt, but it was now nearly dark, and his throbbing ankle would make travel on the uneven terrain painful in the light of day, let alone at night. Would that I might just stay here and die. The words had barely crossed his mind when Wisdom scolded him for self-pity. Wisdom, O cruel mistress thou, remove from me thy needless torments. The emotions that accompanied his recent visions lingered and propelled his mind to thoughts of Hava. The very thought of her fanned his inner ache, instantly restoring it to full force. This torment will follow me to the grave. He rolled to his side and curled up, pulling his clothing tight around him against the night-chilled air. He sighed with a shudder. He could barely manage a few tears and a soft whimper, the more overt expressions of grief long spent, while his stomach turned in painful pangs. My guards are close by. They will find me here in the morning, or a pile of bones next spring. Thoughts of Hava chased him, even as his tired mind drifted toward sleep. Hava was the whole reason for his journey, the unspoken reason, though this was certainly guessed by some. She was also the reason for his depression, his wandering, and now his fall and his present position. Hava was a part of Solomon. She could in no wise be forgotten. She invaded his emotions, his thoughts, even his dreams. Hava,